Hey, check it out. Back it up. Yeah. Drop it down. Make it shake. Ow! History, 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 history.
This deep dive episode will be a bit dark and graphic. Just a pre-warning. What if humanity's attempt to make executions more humane only made them more horrifying? What happened next didn't go according to plan. The death stretched on longer than promised. The witnesses weren't prepared for what they saw. And the machine that was supposed to represent progress ended up revealing just how cruel progress could be. How did electricity, once the future, become an instrument of death? Let's take a deep dive into the dark and conflicting topic, the first electric chair execution. Since ancient times, a common and dominant form of execution across humanity has been hanging. The first recorded instance of an execution by hanging was in Homer's Odyssey, when 12 of Penelope's disloyal slave women were hanged by Telemachus, Odysseus' son. Hanging became a primary execution method during the Middle Ages, particularly in England. For those accused of greater crimes such as high treason, they were drawn, dragged on a makeshift wooden sled to their execution, hanged, and quartered, or disemboweled, as their punishment. While in the Middle Ages, execution by hanging was a public spectacle, in the late 19th century in the United States, especially in the South, states began to shift away from public hangings due to rising racial tensions. It was believed that public executions served as capital punishment for the offender and deterrent for those watching the execution, a debate which is still argued to this day. However, crowds could become unruly, depending on public opinion, of the person being punished. And on the other side of the rope, an execution could be seen as a public spectacle or entertainment. A gradual move toward viewing executions as a solemn act of state justice drove this shift away from public executions. An occasional problem with hangings were botched executions. While the punishment was meant to be a quick death by breaking the neck, sometimes things could go wrong, causing the execution to be far more graphic than intended. Prolonged strangulation, decapitation, or serious injury occurred more frequently than people were comfortable with, leading to the public outcry to abolish the death penalty in many places in the United States. As an example, in 1906, William Williams hit the floor below the platform, requiring men to hold him up by the rope for 14 minutes until strangulation occurred. This is only one of many examples of botched executions by hanging, and a good example of the growing public discomfort. In the 19th century, a belief that technology could solve all moral problems arose. It is known as scientific humanitarianism. This growing philosophy viewed scientific progress as inherently good and a service to humanity. Spurred by figures such as Rudolf Carnap, a German philosopher, the philosophy spurred inventions, engineering, and scientific progress that would reshape the modern world. But can science make killing merciful? A key figure in our story, Dr. Alfred P. Southwick, a steamboat engineer, dentist, and inventor from Buffalo, New York. His first idea for the electrocution as a death penalty alternative came after witnessing a drunk man kill himself by touching a generator. From what he witnessed, he believed electricity could cause instant and painless death. During the development of the electric chair, animals were used to test out generators and dial in how much of a shock was required. A commission was formed by New York State to find a better execution method than hanging, and the decision was made to replace hanging with electrocution. They argued their case by using keywords like civilized, modern, and scientific. But there was more happening behind the curtain. People were playing chess for their own gain and saw opportunity in the dentist's invention. Southwick originally reached out to Thomas Edison for his help developing the electric chair. However, Edison was adamantly against capital punishment and referred the determined steamboat engineer to George Westinghouse. This may seem like an honest move of one inventor trying to help out another by steering him in the right direction. However, it's more devious than that. Thomas Edison is the father of direct current, or DC, electricity, while George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla were the spearheads for alternating current, or AC. Edison's intentions were to associate the use of AC generators with death in the public eye. To demonstrate the dangers of AC power, Edison set up demonstrations where the tin dishes were connected to an AC generator. Dogs would be released near the tins, and when they made contact, they would be electrocuted and die. He held such demonstrations for New York State officials with the hopes of getting AC to be used for electric chairs. Edison hoped executions would discredit Westinghouse. The nickname for electric chair executions were referred to as being Westinghoused to further discredit George Westinghouse. Much like Edison, Westinghouse did not want to be associated with capital punishment. So Harold Brown was commissioned by New York State to continue the project after multiple prisons ordered electric chairs for their prisons. To ensure the chair would run off of AC generators and not DC generators, Edison secretly funded the project. And now, with the project greenlit and pressing forward, the time was coming for its first real-world use, an event that would shock people across the United States and generate even more controversy. Who was William Kemmler? William Kemmler was born in Philadelphia in 1806. Both of his parents were immigrants from Germany, and both were known for being alcoholics. At age 10, William dropped out of school, unable to read or write, and began working at his father's butcher shop. Kemmler's father would die from an infection he received after a drunken brawl, and his mother from complications with prolonged alcohol use. After his parents' deaths, William went into the peddling business, selling goods door to door, and raised enough money to buy a horse and a cart. At this point, he too was a heavy alcoholic. Once during a drunken binge with his friends, William declared that he would jump an 8-foot fence with his horse and cart. The attempt was shockingly a failure, and his cart and goods were destroyed in the incident. He was known to his friends and local Buffalo as Philadelphia Billy, and his drinking binges were well noted. On March 29th, in 1889, William Kemmler was recovering from one of his infamous binges when he became enraged with his girlfriend, Tilly Ziegler. He reportedly accused her of stealing from him and plotting to run away with a friend of his. When the argument reached its peak, he retrieved a hatchet and struck Tilly multiple times until she was dead. Then William went to a neighbor's house and announced that he had just murdered his girlfriend. That same day, William was accused of the murder of Tilly Ziegler. His trial and sentencing were swift. He was convicted of first-degree murder on May 10th. Only 3 days later, he was sentenced to death, destined to be the first execution by electric chair. However, George Westinghouse was still trying to disassociate AC generators with capital punishment, and one of his lawyers appealed to the court, claiming that electrocution was a violation of the Eighth Amendment, as cruel and unusual punishment. The case was brought to the Supreme Court, and ultimately the court turned down the appeal on the grounds that there was no cruel and unusual punishment in death by electrocution. It was deemed by the Supreme Court that this form of execution would be far more humane than hanging. At 5 a.m., on August 6, 1890, William Kemmler is awoken from his cell at the Auburn State Prison. He is put in a suit with a necktie and white shirt and fed breakfast. After, the top of his head is shaved, and at 6:38 a.m., Kemmler enters the execution chamber. Approximately 25 people are present in the execution room, to include physicians Dr. Spitzka and Dr. MacDonald, both officially designated to oversee the execution. The warden of Auburn Prison, Charles Durston, Alfred Southwick, the inventor of the electric chair. Additionally, reporters from various news publications were also present. Kemmler is brought into the room and introduced to the witnesses, who were seated in a semicircle facing the death chair. It was noted in the official report that William's manner and appearance indicated a state of subdued elation, as if he were happy to be the center of attention. It seemed he did not understand the gravity of the scenario. He was seated in a chair in front of the electric chair, and after the warden's introduction, he stated to the witnesses, "Well, I wish everyone good luck in this world. I think I am going to a good place, and the papers has been saying a lot of stuff about me that wasn't true. That's all I have to say." The warden ordered Kemmler stand and remove his coat. Without any displayed emotion or nervousness, William took his seat in the death chair. He calmly followed all directions as electrodes were strapped to him and his arms and legs were positioned and strapped in. He told the men preparing the chair to not hurry. "Be sure that everything is all right." He pressed his back firmly against the back electrodes and requested that the electrode on his head be strapped tighter. The whole setup took about 4 minutes and ended with the final moistening of the electrodes. The warden gave the order to charge the switches. The instant contact was made, Kemmler's body jolted into a state of complete rigidity. The shock lasted 17 seconds, and no consciousness was noted from any of the witnesses. The warden ordered that contact be broken. Kemmler was pronounced dead. The physician, Dr. MacDonald, had originally recommended a 20-second shock at 2,000 volts or more. However, other physicians said that 10 seconds would suffice, and a time span shorter, but not by much, was decided on, as well as only charging the generator to 1,000 volts. It was reported when the shock ended, his state of rigidity immediately ended and William's whole body relaxed. Half a minute after the first shock, his chest began to spasm and mucus began to come out of Kemmler's mouth. There was no evidence of a return of consciousness or bodily sensation, but due to the possibility that his life might not have been completely extinguished, the order was given by Dr. Spitzka to deliver a second shock. The generator was charged to 2,000 volts this time, and a second shock was delivered, this time lasting 70 seconds. The state of rigidity in Kemmler's body returned. Blood vessels began to pop and bleed on his skin, and a horrible odor permeated the room. Some witnesses fainted at the sight. There were claims that at one point during the second shock, his flesh caught fire. It was reported by a witness from the New York Times that the sponge on the top of his head dried up from the prolonged shock, and the flesh under and around the electrode at the base of the spine was singeing. One witness famously said that it was worse than hanging. The entire execution, that was supposed to take 20 seconds or less, ended up lasting a grueling 8 minutes. Following the execution, shock waves reverberated through the public. A newspaper headline read, "A horrible spectacle," while another stated, "A failure of science." Physicians were torn on the use of electric chair, with many condemning its use, while others maintained that it was more humane than hanging. The debate mostly arose from the botched first attempt and the aftermath of the event. However, the argument in its favor came from the observed immediate loss of consciousness, with the idea that the punished could not feel the pain of the shock. In the aftermath, Edison continued to publicly condemn the use of an electric chair for capital punishment. George Westinghouse made the statement, "They would have done a better job with an axe," and also publicly condemned further use of the electric chair. Despite widespread backlash, New York State kept the electric chair and other states would begin adopting it. The electric chair would become the dominant form of execution in the United States from 1889 to the mid-1980s. Several states still authorize the electric chair as a backup to lethal injection to this day, to include Alabama, Arkansas, and Florida. This is not the only example of a botched execution via electric chair. As the use of electric chairs spread across the United States, so did the number of horrific and failed executions. In 1977, the execution method of lethal injection was introduced in Oklahoma and quickly replaced the use of the electric chair. With further research into pain and consciousness, there has been evidence that consciousness still persists during the shock, which would mean an enduring pain until consciousness fails. This has contributed to the argument against the use of electric chairs. And overall, the debate still continues over the death penalty. There seemed to be an idea that the use of technology would remove moral responsibility. A painless, humane death was promised by the inventor and those lobbying for the electric chair's use. However, history paints a different picture. As new methods of any practice come out, it is difficult to predict who will be negatively impacted and what the outcome will be. Progress often comes with blood on its hands, and history remains amoral, acting as a hard drive of lessons learned throughout our evolution as a society. I feel that it's easy to look back at past events and cast judgment on those who had the responsibility thrust upon them. However, we are looking through a lens of understanding in hindsight, and it's very possible that through the same lens, those same people would agree with our perspective today. Now I will step off my soapbox. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. This is a dark and heavy topic with some grisly detail that I hope was not too gratuitous. I appreciate you coming with me on this deep dive into what you didn't hear about the first electric chair execution. Consider sharing this episode with somebody that you know is into dark history, and leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Thank you for listening, and until next time, this is What You Didn't Hear.
Hey, check it out.